Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Fenson, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to Harvest Your Own. Today we have a very interesting guest, Fatima Dhooma. I first heard about her when a friend of mine, Alan Orr, mentored some hunters out of Calgary and took a young lady out for a deer hunt, I believe was her first one. But it was an interesting story. It was covered by CBC and a bunch of other outlets. And man, it was like one of those things that just makes you feel good when you read it and see what's going on. And I would best describe Fatima, even though I don't know a lot about her other than what I've read and seen, as an avid foodie. You know, she's got 3 fur babies, her dogs and her cat, and you know when their names are basil, turmeric, and olive, that there's a strong connection there somewhere. Welcome to Harvest Your Own.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty excited because I'm a foodie. I love flavors. I love spice. You know, my wife has a really thick book in the house. It's called the Spice Bible. And I go through it often to see what pairs or what flavors it'll bring out or how it can enhance. But that's your background in education, family background, education, the whole works.
Yeah, food's been a thing that I've built my identity on.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be here on the podcast, chatting with you. Yeah, I think it's kind of tricky for me to pinpoint my journey or where it started. I was born and raised in Ontario, in Toronto, in the city. And my family and I moved up to northern Alberta when I was about 12 years old. And that was a really big transition, moving from the concrete jungle of Toronto to northern Alberta, the boreal forest. And so, yeah, that was a very tender time of my life, trying to discover myself and figure out this new chapter of our life in northern Alberta. And I spent a lot of my time outside. I would walk to school all the way up to grade 12 and often stop by the river, lay by the river. And so the nature really became part of my identity and finding myself. And along with that, I was missing home. I was missing my extended family, specifically my grandmothers. My cultural background is really diverse. My dad's mom is Indian South African, and my mom's mom is Syrian Turkish. And so you can imagine I grew up around some incredible flavors and really vibrant dishes. And so, yeah, I became fascinated with food and the outdoors and the environment. I went on to study nutrition in university and food studies. And over COVID, I started a food blog to capture my grandmother's recipes. And that was a really neat experience, just trying to document their very informal ways of passing down recipes. I also am a certified food, health, and educator. And I help women specifically nourish themselves and figure out kind of what the best way to go about their health is.
Very interesting. Like I said, when I read about you, I knew we had a lot in common. And, you know, the nice thing about food and being in the wilds is it feeds more than your body. It feeds your soul. And
absolutely,
you can relate to that with your grandmas and the love and affection they probably put into the meals that you thought about and needed to rekindle with.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So a lot of the recipes on your site, you were saying you actually had to call and try to get the recipes, but none of it was written down.
Yeah, no, it was very orally transmitted, and a very informal way of guiding recipes. You know, I think we're used to the very quantitative way of cooking these days, where it's like half a teaspoon exactly or a quarter cup exactly. And the way my grandmother's taught to cook was a lot more intuitive and a lot more organic, and utilizing things like a handful or a pinch and that very tangible way of relating to food. And so I really wanted to make sure that I I captured that on the website. And so it's been a bit of a nice balance of a challenge as well as an exciting thing to capture their recipes.
I definitely understand that challenge because I've always cooked since I was a child at home. My mom and dad never discouraged me, even though some days I got up too early and had the stove going before they wanted me to. But when I started to publish recipes, it was hard because I went by the pinch and the handful, or taste it and add some more. And now I had to start measuring everything. And it's like, how much is a pinch and how much is a handful? And if I add more, I can't just do this. I have to get out a teaspoon and start measuring little bits at a time. So it is a challenge to change an oral recipe into something that you can share with others. The other thing I've learned over the years is some people have no cooking background whatsoever. So they need that actual guidance where you spell it out.
Totally. And I feel really grateful because ever since I was a little girl, I would, follow my grandmothers around the kitchen or follow my mom, help them out. And so I really developed that intuition. And it's only recently that I've realized I too have to be very specific when it comes to recipe development and transmitting it either through the website or even just like with my friends and family over the phone. Because I think it is a skill that can be honed and developed over time, but it does take a bit of technique for sure.
It does. A little bit of time, just time and patience, but it's worth it in the end. I looked at some of your grandmother's recipes and I am just dying to try them out.
I'm excited to hear how it goes.
So you sound very outdoorsy and very adventuresome. Your family, do they have a hunting background? Were they outdoorsy?
Not at all, actually. My parents were both city folk. My dad always had an interest in the outdoors. He's sort of an academic and a person that's really inspired by the outdoors, but maybe never had all the opportunities to actually get out there. And I'd like to think that I was the catalyst to bringing him outdoors. I didn't grow up like outside camping or doing any of the outdoor things. It wasn't until the 2016 wildfire in Fort McMurray that I tried camping. So just to kind of rewind the clock a little bit, when we moved up north, we lived there for almost a decade. And then, as you might be aware, the fire happened and wiped out what I was familiar with, which is this boreal forest that I spent so much time in. And my family and I had to relocate. So we were evacuated to Edmonton. Our home sustained some damage. And after the restoration process was done, I decided to return. My family stayed back in Edmonton. And it was really weird going back. It kind of felt like I was in a field of burnt toothpicks. And it was very difficult for me to feel that connection that I was longing to connect with the environment. And so I was doing some research and I stumbled across an outdoor opportunity in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. And it was with a small liberal arts college named Zaytuna, and there was a camp leader. His name is Imam Dawood. He's an avid bow hunter and outdoorsman himself, and I was really inspired by his story. He had started a movement called Get Your Own Halal.
Oh wow!
So I'm a Muslim woman, and growing up, we were taught and we learned a lot about dietary agency and ethics around food. And so he did a really good job at marrying those two concepts with the outdoors and halal food practice. And so he put on this 10-day backcountry camping trip in the middle of nowhere in Kennedy Lake. Sort of pack your own toilet paper and scooper with you in the backpack trip. And I was super excited and intrigued, and it felt like a really good way to dive into things. And so I packed my bags, had no idea what to expect. And it was a very steep learning curve. We had to hike almost 25 kilometers into our campsite. I think midway I was like, what did I do to myself?
Right. I feel that way when I go sheep hunting sometimes.
Yeah, it's like, yikes, this is a lot of work. And he had encouraged us to get temporary fishing licenses as sort of part of the camping outdoor experience. And that was super intriguing to me. And so I signed up, I did the course requirements, and then we were out there, and at about day, I want to say 8, we ran out of food, like every responsible camper does. And so the leisurely aspect of fishing became more necessary. We were a bit more hungry, and we had a decision to make. Do we go back, or do we try to, use whatever peanut butter and cans of tuna that we have left to sustain ourselves, and then obviously supplement with the fishing? And that was my first experience ever harvesting anything. And I have an article on the blog called What the Flopping Fish Taught Me. That was
I saw that.
Yeah, that was a really pivotal moment for me because, standing there in the mucky marsh, holding this pure slab of mussel flopping in my hand and having told, okay, now you have to put it out of its misery and kill it to harvest it. It brought up a lot of emotion for me. I thought about my late pet cat of 17 years who passed away last year. I thought about all the other animals that I had eaten and interacted with, and maybe not as consciously as I felt in that moment with that fish. And mind you, that was probably the best tasting trout I've ever had in my life. Around the fire, we salt and peppered, oiled it up, and it was amazing.
The basics.
But that night in the tent, I remember telling myself, like, yikes, I need to really reevaluate my relationship with animals and meat. And, maybe there could be an opportunity for me to get really close to my dietary practice and try out something like hunting. I thought about maybe going to a farm and performing slaughter there. But hunting stuck out specifically because of sort of you go out into the animal's environment as opposed to bringing the animal to you. And that was where I set the intention to go hunting.
Well, it's a very profound moment. Things changing that drastically and opening your eyes to what's out there and what could be done and tying it back to your education and, those days laying by the riverbank.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from?
Yeah, the environment and I think there's a lot of things that have become more forefront today, things like climate change, inflation, floods, fires, and it's unfortunate that it's taken that to remind us of our intimate connection with the environment. But yeah, I think food is a really special way to build and foster that connection, and it's something we do every single day, something we need to do.
Absolutely.
I think, 7 days is the maximum amount of time we can go without food. And so eventually it's going to have to get that close to our face, literally. And I think that's something magical about food is it not only becomes us chemically, but it is us and we are it. And,
Right.
and I think that's a very special and intimate thing that we ought to foster.
Absolutely. What did you do after you found out about the flopping fish and how it made you change your thinking, basically? Where did you go from there?
So yeah, I returned back and I ended up working in Calgary for a few years, and that's where I met your friend Alan, a good friend and an incredible teacher and mentor to me. And it was kind of interesting because going back into another city, I lived in downtown Calgary. It was close to the mountains, and I tried my best to be outside as much as I can, but still very much an urban center. And it was at a teacher's workshop that Alan hosted that I learned more about Alberta Hunter Education Association, or AHIA, the organization that he was working with at the time. And I kind of shared with him my experience with the flopping fish. I told him my intentions. I told him some of the things that I was looking for. And he said, well, AHIA offers mentored hunts. So if you want, I can take you out on a hunt. And at the time I was like, wow, this is like really awesome and really cool to have such a low barrier to entry way to get into hunting. And that was the summer of 2018. I was engaged to be married in November of 2018. So when I came back home and I told my mom, yeah, I'm going to go hunting in November, she was like, maybe not. Maybe not before your wedding. I don't think that's a good idea. So I ended up putting it off for another year, but it was really foundational because in that year I did a bunch of reading and I completed my Hunter Ed certificate, and I'm sort of a bit of a nerd. So I picked up some really cool books on hunting and recipe development. And I think in that process too, just to tangent really quickly, I found that there was a bit of a gap in the hunting recipe literature in terms of, things outside of stews and roasts and steaks.
You nailed it.
Yeah. And I think at the time I didn't think about how recipe development and my blog or any of the recipes that I've done today that wasn't necessarily an original intention, but at the time I was just like, okay, it's going to be a lot of stews and roasts and I need to figure out how to do this. And then, it was the following November that Alan and I went out hunting, and it was a completely transformative experience. I mean, I'm honestly lost for words because it really did shape so much of not just my relationship with hunting, my relationship with animals, my relationship with being outside, my awareness of things. I feel like that's something maybe hunters don't talk about a lot, is the amount of spatial awareness and attention to detail that starts to become very forefront.
And very rewarding too.
Incredibly rewarding. And it's a very grounding experience. When I was in Calgary, I worked in mental health promotion, and I've read a little bit about ecotherapy and eco-psychology, and this idea that, when we look at green, it calms our mind, it lowers cortisol levels, or the fact that, taking note of our surroundings and our environment is so pivotal and important to regulating our heart rhythms and regulating ourselves. And so I feel like there's a huge therapeutic aspect of hunting. And that was very, very evident that first time I went out, because we were out there for, I want to say, over 10 hours.
Oh, wow.
Before sunrise till shortly after sunset. So it was a long day, sitting outside in minus 25. I mean, people equate hunting sometimes to killing, but really that killing only is like a second of the 10 minus hours that you're out there. And so that real getting immersed in your environment, that feeling of grounding yourself is something I still take, even if I'm not out there hunting.
Yeah, I like it when it does take a bit more time. If you go out and it's over in 2 minutes, you don't get to soak everything in. And the hunts that take 10 hours or 3 days or a week, boy, the memories, they just never disappear.
Absolutely. And sometimes, you have to be silent. You have to think like the prey, so to speak, and you have to be there present and aware. And that doesn't really happen when you're living in a city. And so going out, we were in southern Alberta for that hunt with Alan, and it was amazing. It was amazing.
Give us a little quick rundown on what happened. Like, this is a pretty pivotal moment in your life, and it ties a whole bunch of things together for you. Tell us how you felt. It had to be emotional.
Yeah, emotional, no kidding. You can probably ask Alan. I'm sort of a bucket of tears every time I go out hunting, which I think is a good thing for me. It keeps me emotionally in tune. But yeah, to share a little bit more about that experience. Well, for starters, we were out there for a very long time before we even saw anything. We had passed by another hunter who did get a buck. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a dead deer, or a dead animal, really, that wasn't in a butcher shop or something like that. And I remember that experience, even though it wasn't necessarily the animal that I had gone after or the animal that I had harvested. It was like, whoa, first of all, it's a big buck. I've never actually seen it. And there was still steam or like condensation coming off of its body, and it was minus 25. So it was really cold. And I just remember thinking, whoa, that's a warm, dead deer. That's really weird. And then I had this moment where I was kind of trepidatious. I was like, oh, is this really something I'm going to do? Is it? And that's where I think the role of the mentor comes in, because Alan is an incredible guide and an incredible teacher, not just knowledgeable about hunting practice and ethics and technique and things like that, but also just an incredible human being, being able to be compassionate and kind and calming. I remember the first deer that we did see, when we lined up, I had the rifle lined up and the tripod, I get nervous even just talking about it, because honestly, it was such an emotional experience. And it's kind of like a now or never. In hunting, there's not a lot of time to process and think and dialogue and digest in the way that maybe the rest of our practices in the modern world are conducted. But when you're lined up in front of an animal, it's like you need to be ready. You need to be accurate. You need to be steady. These are things that are necessary. And so he just put his hand on my shoulder, and he could tell that I was getting really nervous. And he said, if you were to stop here, this would still be counted as a success. And I think back to that moment all the time. And I really do kind of channel that inner Alan voice a lot of the times in my life when I'm nervous, or, just go with it. Do what your values are telling you to do. And I lined up, I took my shot, I missed. And that was a very humbling experience, because if you were to look at my target practices in the range, they're really good. And so I had this sort of confidence that, yeah, it's going to be okay. But when you're out there in the wild, it's a very different experience, as you're definitely aware.
Your heart rate was probably a little different than on the range.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a lot less, calibration necessarily to be done when you're out there. But yeah, I did miss that. And eventually I did get a harvest, and I sat there for about 15, 20 minutes, just bawling my eyes out. I found it really special because that first hunt was a very tender one. And the deer that the little doe that we got ended up resting just next to what was the only tree that had totally decayed. So in this forest, even though it was winter and all the trees were kind of in their hibernating stage, they all had some semblance of life to them, but there was this one hollowed out dead tree, and the deer was just at the base of that. And I'm sort of a romantic poet kind of person, and so I just took a moment to really take that in. And then, we went through, and there was another mentor-mentee couple that was there, and so together we all did the field dressing together, and that was also a really amazing and wicked experience altogether. I again, that warm steam coming off of the deer's body, and just, being really careful to salvage and make most of everything. And then we put it on a sled and dragged it up to the truck. And it was a rewarding, tender, overall I was very satisfied. I felt I didn't regret it, which I think is a really important thing. It was a really good reminder for, why is it that I even went out to do this, and why I continue to go do it.
I often say hunting is very spiritual, and you get different things from it. I had my friend Dan Schmidt on here, and the topic was, is it all right to cry as a hunter? Because, Dan's a grown man. He's got kids that are grown up, and to this day, when he harvests a deer, he cannot stop the waterworks. It's part of the emotion. It's part of the respect for the animal. It sort of brings things together for him, and there's nothing wrong with it. I think it shows great respect for what you do, who you are, the animals you pursue.
Yeah, I think it's a very human response.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, there's a comprehensive collection of information to gain insight and knowledge. Head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game to make the connection between health and food.
There's a lot of parallels, biologically speaking, and that was something that became very apparent to me too. Like cutting open this deer, it just brought flashbacks to grade 12 biology, and there's a lot of parallels. And I think I agree with you. I think hunting is one of the most, if not the most, and might be a bit of a statement here, most spiritual experiences you can experience, because it puts us to direct proximity to death. And that's not something we like to talk about in our society. We don't like to talk about death. And I think that's where people have an issue, or there's a stigmatization against hunting, or this idea that an average citizen or an average person can take the life of another animal. Whereas we don't necessarily have that experience if we were to walk into a grocery store and pick up a slab of meat or a pack of chicken wings, or there's sort of this distancing and desensitization that happens there. And hunting does not do that. Hunting, You're in nature, you're in the environment, you're at its mercy, you're at its direction. And that's a very rare space for the modern human to be.
Modern, because 100 years ago, people probably still had to, trade with their neighbors for chickens, or harvest their own, or do anything, even have domestic meat, let alone wildly harvested meats.
100%. My dad tells me stories of growing up in apartheid South Africa, and his mom sending him out to go get chicken, and he would go to the farmer, and the farmer would tell him, go pick your chicken. Which one do you want? And he'd pick the chicken and he'd take it home warm. And I think that experience, even as a person who has a nutrition background, we learn a lot about how an excess in animal protein or red meat is detrimental to the human body. And that might be true in the extent that we eat meat in the modern day, being totally divorced from what it actually takes to get that meat. And I think that was a huge impetus for me. Because when I go hunting, not only is it the most satisfying experience to be able to provide for family and share for friends, but to know that, oh, that took 20 plus hours of labor to put this one meal on the table. There's a sense of gratitude, there's a sense of appreciation, and a sense of a reality check that this is what it really takes to take an animal's life and consume it.
Yeah, we're so far removed from where our food comes from that it puts things back into perspective. And I see that with our girls. You know, I got twin girls that are 6 years old.
Aww.
And in our shop here, when I bring an animal home, they're the ones that are giggling, laughing, saying, let's go. And they're out here helping cut and wrap, and they make their special marks on all the packages in terms of what it is.
Aww.
If I bring ducks home, they get a knife and they actually help me clean them because their favorite meal in the whole world is ducklets.
Aww.
So they,
Lucky duckies.
And it's very strange for them because they go to school and tell their friends, and their friends are going, ooh, what? You did what? And we even heard back from one of the teachers saying, wow, this is really special. You guys should be proud of what you're doing. They didn't come after us for, showing our kids this. They're like, this needs to happen more often. So.
Oh, 100%. So
you got to experience firsthand as an adult because you were never subjected to it as a child or growing up.
No, not at all. Like I said, that fish was the first thing that I'd ever gotten that close to, taking its life, cooking it, and then taking it from the field to plate.
Yeah. And so what was the experience when you actually, you field dressed it, you had to deal with it, you got it home, and now you're in the kitchen and you have that meat for the very first time in your hands and on your plate. How did you deal with that?
I'll rewind it a little bit more because there's an interesting story. So as I mentioned, I lived in downtown Calgary. So as an urban hunter, I didn't necessarily have a glorious space like yours to process this animal. And I'm so grateful because, again, this points to the aspect of community that comes out with hunting. And so one of the other mentors that was with us, he had offered, he said, I don't live too far from you. So if you want, you can borrow my garage and you can come into my kitchen and I'll sort of show you the ropes about how to process and butcher this animal. Because I was really adamant that I wanted to be a part of the entire process. It wasn't enough for me to just, kill the animal. I wanted to actually go through and do everything like skin it and butcher it and savor the meat as well as the bones and any scraps we would want to give to like the dogs, or make sure that we're using and respecting the animal in totality. And so we put the deer in the back of his truck and we drove into downtown Calgary, and it was obviously past, it was dark out, and he pulled into the back alley of my apartment, and he was like, okay, well, you gotta take the tenderloins out, because you can't leave those to age out for the next couple days. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'll see you tomorrow. And he was like, no, we need to do it right now. And I was like, oh, okay, well, we're in the back alley of downtown Calgary, so what's the deal here? And so we put on some headlamps, and we went on to the back, and he just started slowly taking out the tenderloins. And I just looked around, and I was like, I really hope nobody's looking at us do this right now, because they're probably wondering what the heck is this. And he just gave me the 2 slabs of small tenderloins, and he's like, yeah, you make these right away because they spoil after a few days. They dry out, yeah. And so I took it home, and I, again, had my fair share of tears and excitement, and I that was the first thing that I cooked. I was crying as I was cooking it. A lot of gratitude. It was a very simple recipe, salt and pepper. I wanted to really capture the pureness of the flavor without changing it so much.
And it's wonderful.
It is so good. And much like the name, super tender. And so I made it with some risotto and green beans and staged it with my husband's denim shirt as a background, because you got to get thrifty and creative when you're on a budget doing food blogging. So, and then we shared it, and I just remember just incredible flavor, the texture, and then, just like every bite savoring it.
That's a wonderful story and a wonderful journey to your first wild, harvested and made meal. You've probably taken it many steps further and developed some recipes with wild game. You talked about the pot roast and the stew, because I run across a lot of people, that's what they do as well. Cooking techniques for wild game where it's very lean, not a lot of fat, it takes a different technique. I talk at the sportsman shows and we do different seminars, and I say wild game takes half the time to cook as beef or pork because it doesn't have the fat for insulation, and the proteins transmit heat. They continue to cook when you take them off the heat source. So it's a bit of a learning curve, but just tell us an example of one or two recipes you've developed that would expand people's horizons in terms of wild game enjoyment.
Yeah, that was a huge learning curve for me too. Because trying to take my grandmother's recipes that would often use things like mutton, lamb, goat, beef, chicken, that do have a higher fat content, and preserving the flavors and the textures and the aromas of those dishes while also incorporating something like a wild game. I've only ever recipe tested with white-tailed deer. One of our family friends, once he learned about my hunting experience, would often drop off his harvest or portions of his harvest. So I've tried recipe developing as well with moose. Obviously a lot stronger game flavor in that one. But I developed a really, really popular South African Indian recipe called aloo keema, which literally translates to potato and meat. But it's a lot more vibrant, I think, than what people think of when they think of potatoes and meat. So it's essentially it's minced meat cooked up in your Indian foundational flavors. So ginger, garlic, onion, turmeric, chili powder, salt, pepper, and cumin and coriander. And you saute that with some tomato, throw in some cubed potatoes and some broth, and then you bring it to a boil, and it becomes this really good curry that you can put over rice or eat it with bread. And that's my go-to just because it's so easy. A lot of the deer that we got, I ground up, and I was able to mix in other meats if I need to. So the fat content piece I could kind of supplement with like beef fat or lamb fat, or just keep it super lean. And like you said, keep the cooking time a bit shorter. And then obviously with Indian cooking, I use a lot of ghee. So that also helps with the fat content supplementing.
Yeah. And flavors.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I love this. You and I would be dangerous because we could be in the kitchen for days at a time, doing things, laughing, celebrating, enjoying. I'd love to talk to you more about your grandma's recipes because they're inspirational and they sort of tug at my heartstrings a little bit. But one last thing I want to talk about is how important are the educational programs and mentorship programs in Alberta to somebody thinking about this? If there's a mom at home that has one of their kids that shows any interest at all, or if there's some lady in Alberta that's like, man, I love this story. Maybe I should look into this. What would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I mean, we live in an age where information is abundant, and access to resources is more prevalent than ever, I'd say. AHIA was a really good start for me. I know there's a number of other organizations, the Alberta Wildlife Federation is one, that are putting an emphasis on attracting a diverse demographic to not just hunting or conservation, but just being outside. And like I alluded to earlier, I think things like climate change and the natural disasters that are becoming more forefront, unfortunately, we're starting to become more conscious of this relationship to the environment. And those organizations are keen to help with that education piece and with that mentorship piece. And there are a lot of really amazing programs that don't necessarily even involve hunting. Things like leather workshopping, or how to make a campfire, or what to spot when you're outside, or how to be safe if you're ever encountered with a bear. And those kind of skills and those kind of experiences are a part of what hunting offers, maybe in a direct or indirect way. And if people are interested in getting involved with hunting, I would recommend, reach out to one of those organizations, express your interests, and start conversations. I mean, I think back to that experience of me talking to Alan. Alan, I didn't know him before then, and I'm so grateful that we know each other now. But, it took a bit of courage for me to be like, hey, this is an idea I have. This is something I'm interested in. These are my reasons. This is my energy and skill set. What do you think? And sometimes it does take a bit of that courage to start conversation. Relationships go a long way after that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of the organizations on here, Harvest Your Own, the different ladies' leagues, women's outdoor programs, AHIA. Anyone that's interested should listen to some of the other podcasts. Check out Harvest Your Own. There's a ton of information about how to get started, how to fuel that fire, where to go, where to turn to, what courses to take, all the resources you need to get started. So you're right. We live in an age where it's never been easier to access those things. And I would just say, don't think about it. Do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been such a gift, like being able to share my experiences with other women who are like-minded. And you'd be surprised. So many women come up to me afterwards and just say, I'd love to just go out on like a simulated hunt just to see what it's like and what to experience it. And I think that would be a really neat idea. So maybe you and I can brainstorm some neat ideas to get people out there and just try it out.
That happens a lot. I'm an avid waterfowl hunter, and it's not uncommon to take people along because they want to experience or to see what happens. And when we're done, they're like, I want to be the shooter next time. Can I try that? What do I need to do? So it's that, it's a little teaser. It's the introduction that's all that's required to get people engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of learning that happens and a lot of thinking that happens when you're out hunting. And it really does parallel our everyday life in many ways.
Yeah. Quickly tell us what your website is, because it's a great resource. I mean, we've talked about the recipes, and people are going to go there to read about the flopping fish and about grandma's recipe and the first meal you made with your deer. So tell us a little bit about your website, where to find it.
Yeah, for folks that are interested, you can visit it. It's www.mufeed.nutrition, MUFEED. There's a bit of play on words there. Mufeed is an Arabic word that means beneficial. And growing up, my grandmothers would often say, eat this, it's mufeed for you. Eat this, it's mufeed for you. And I liked the little kind of pun inserted in there. And it is a space for me to share my food for thought and thoughts on food. Nice. I have a food journal there. That's where I write all my recipes. I also offer consulting and nutrition coaching for women or anyone that's seeking some support with their health. Our food is a very valuable resource. And so I'm really keen on bringing together my educational background and being able to chat with people and help them optimize their food and their health. And then, a lot of memory capturing. So they're the 2 recipes of my grandmothers that are up there. I actually was able to record them in their voices, sharing their recipes. And that's a very meaningful thing for me to do. My dad's mom passed away last year, and the fact that I have her recipes and her voice sharing it is something I'm going to personally treasure, and I'm so grateful to be able to share it with the world.
Yeah, that's pretty wonderful. I lost my mom last fall too, and I got some great memories of growing up cooking in the kitchen, making all kinds of different things, from pies and pierogies to, So it is a wonderful thing to have and to cherish. But I want to thank you for coming in. This has been a very interesting podcast with great information. And I applaud you for doing what you do and reaching out to help other people. You've got a great message, and I think that it will resonate with an awful lot of people.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for having me.
We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.